Hi, and welcome to this episode of John's Motorcycle Rescue and Review. Today we are looking at Suzuki's mighty GS1150 ES. And this motorcycle was produced between 1984 and 1986, and it was really the swan song for the air-cooled 16-valve Suzuki GS line of motorcycles. And I'll be giving some history on the GS1150 ES. I'll also give some specs on the bike and my riding impressions of that bike. This is the 7th episode in my Blast from the Past series. And in this series, we are opening the old photo album and taking a look at some of the bikes I've owned. I've owned a lot of cool bikes over the years, and I just thought it would be fun to share my riding impressions of those bikes with you. GS1150 ES history. By the mid-80s, Suzuki was already working on their GSXR line of bikes. But those were still a few years off, so Suzuki, in an attempt to have a stopgap motorcycle, developed the GS1150 ES, and it would actually test some new technologies that they were thinking about incorporating on the GSXR line of motorcycles as well. Suzuki's GS1150 ES was the last of the big bore Suzuki GS line, and that line incorporated big air-cooled 16-valve inline 4-cylinder motors and 5-speed transmissions. And this power plant and transmission combination was a development of the GS1100E motor of 1983 and 84, and really can trace its roots all the way back to the GS750 of 1976. When tested by Cycle World in their April 1984 review, the GS1150 ran a 10.4-second quarter mile, making it the quickest production motorcycle tested up to that time. Top speed on the GS1150 ES was 141 miles an hour. The horsepower on the bike was 100.4 horsepower at 8,500 RPM. The engine was a 1,135cc air-cooled 16-valve inline 4. It was fed by four 36mm Mikuni carbs, and it featured Suzuki's twin swirl combustion chamber, or TSCC. As I said earlier, it had a 5-speed transmission. The frame differed from previous GS models in that it was a box section steel frame. The wet weight on the bike was right around 570 pounds. It sported a 16-inch front wheel and a 17-inch rear wheel. The suspension on the GS1150 ES consisted of a full floater, rising rate rear swing arm, and front forks with anti-dive units. And unlike some previous anti-dive units, these were not integrated into the braking system, and so they didn't detract. When you hit the brakes, all the braking power went to the brakes and it didn't go to the anti-dive system. So what was the GS1150 ES like to ride? Well, this particular GS1150 ES had a 4-into-1 Vance & Hines exhaust. It was jetted for the exhaust, and honestly, it was a very quick machine. The motor made smooth power everywhere in the rev range. It was not a peaky unit. And it really meant from idle to redline, anytime you open the throttle, this bike just rocketed away. Didn't matter what gear you were in, it didn't matter what RPM, it always had usable, real-world power, and it was a hoot to ride. The GS1150 ES is a large bike, and so even with the 16-inch front wheel, it did take a lot of body English and a lot of input to get it to go around corners quickly. At the time, this wasn't really a big deal to me. I was used to riding the bigger bikes, and I was used to the higher effort that they required in the corners. The GS1150 ES was a comfortable bike to ride. It had a very comfortable seat. It had a roomy cockpit. The ergonomics on it were very nice. I'm a tall guy, and I found it comfortable seating position-wise for long trips. Much more of a sport touring flavor than a hardcore GSXR style of riding position. I really like the styling on the GS1150 ES. I love the look of that fairing, and it honestly gave very good wind protection for my knees, for my upper body. The only downside that I noticed on it was the airflow coming over the top of the windshield was deafeningly loud. Probably one of the loudest bikes I've ever been on as far as wind noise goes, and it meant I had to wear earplugs every time I rode it. The 5-speed transmission in the GS1150 ES was a very slick shifting unit. It was a robust unit. I guess an issue I had with it was only a 5-speed. At highway speeds, you definitely felt like you needed a 6th gear. The motor certainly could have handled a 6th gear given its power characteristics. And that leads me to another complaint with the bike. Although it had power everywhere, that motor was a vibey unit. And when you combined the 5-speed transmission and then a vibey motor, it really made the bike fatiguing to ride for any length of time if you were doing over 55 miles an hour. The brakes on the GS1150 ES were marginal for the amount of power that the bike made and the heft of the bike. And when you combine that with the softly sprung front suspension, it really didn't give confidence under braking. And so what I did on mine, I actually put some spacers in the top of the fork legs to increase the spring preload in the front suspension. And that really helped with the handling, and it also helped with the braking of the bike and really elevated the level of safety and control under braking. One of the fond memories I have with this GS was one Father's Day, my dad and I went out and he was riding my ZRX 1100 Kawasaki. Up in the mountains, I thought for sure that the ZRX with its much better brakes and its very snappy low-end acceleration would really walk away from this motorcycle. And it really didn't. I was able to keep up and we had a really good time riding in the mountains. In conclusion, I think the GS1150 ES was a really cool bike. I love the fact that Suzuki, for its final production model of the GS line, produced the quickest production motorcycle to date with that bike. I love the motor characteristics. I love the broadband power that it delivered. I love the smooth shifting transmission on the bike. And I really like the looks. I think it's a really nice looking bike. However, by 1984, this bike was really feeling long in the tooth. It was obviously of a previous generation of motorcycles. The competition from Honda and Kawasaki featured both liquid cooling and 6-speed transmissions, and they really felt so much more refined than the Suzuki product. The buzziness of the engine, the fact that it was only a 5-speed, it really made the GS1150 ES feel old, feel out of date. And in that regards, it really was the last of a bygone era. I'd love to know what you guys think. If any of you have owned a GS1150E or the GS1150 ES and want to post your experience in the comment section below, please feel free to do that. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative, and until next time, enjoy the ride.